Hi everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm starting the first of a three-part series on ayahuasca and astrology. Now, I'm doing this series after getting tons of, random emails over the course of the past few years since I started my YouTube channel, who have said, "Could you elaborate more on, the relationship between ayahuasca and astrology?" Some people know that I wrote a book about ayahuasca called Fishers of Men, The Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest. It was published in 2010. And I went on a book tour across the country, and during that time launched my astrology practice. So my work with astrology really has a pretty deep history with my 10 years that I spent drinking ayahuasca. So anyway, over time, I mention it here or there. I don't talk about it a lot, but I mention it here or there, and people have asked me to speak more, to sort of elaborate upon my experiences with ayahuasca and how they tie into my practice as an astrologer, or how they maybe informed or shaped my journey with astrology. So I thought, I received one more this past week from one of my students asking me to elaborate upon this topic. And I thought, okay, it's finally time that I make a video. I sat down and broke this into three parts because I realized there were three sort of distinct sections. So I'm going to tell you what they are first, then we'll dive into part one today. And for those of you who don't know what ayahuasca is, don't worry, I'll be telling you about it in a second. So we will be talking about, in this first video, sort of what did ayahuasca do for me? What is ayahuasca? What is my, kind of personal history with it? What kind of effects did it have on me, both practically and, let's say, philosophically? Sort of how did it change my paradigm, my worldview, my spirituality or faith, as well as what practical effects did it have in my life? So that's part one. Part two, I'm going to talk about how ayahuasca became this integral bridge for me to come into both astrology and yoga, but specifically I'll focus on astrology in that video. And then as I was studying and learning astrology, actually for a while, ayahuasca played this really important role in the actual early learning process as well. So I'll talk about how did ayahuasca point me to astrology, and how did it participate in teaching me a little bit about astrology? Then finally, in part three, I'm going to talk about the virtues or benefits of psychedelics for spiritual life or for astrologers generally, as well as the potential pitfalls, because it's not all rosy. And I certainly, in doing this video series, do not want to present, I'm certainly not recommending that anybody do psychedelics or do anything illegal or drink ayahuasca even. I think these are, they're deeply personal choices. They don't have the same effect for everybody. And sometimes they can even have detrimental effects. So I want to make sure that I'm covering this really objectively. And, there's a lot of people who really glamorize psychedelics. And of course, there's lots to be really thankful in my own life. Like I wouldn't be here without the influence of some of these experiences that I'm going to talk to you about. But I also want to be careful as we go that you know that part three will also be looking at some of the potential pitfalls, and also the choice that I had to make at a certain point in my life as to leaving psychedelics behind. How did I get to that point, and why? So this is just for people who have been asking. Like I said, I do videos based a lot on what people want to hear about. And so if you ever want to write to me and ask me to do a series on something else, or any talks on astrology in particular that you'd like to hear about, you can email me info@nightlightastrology.com. All right. So first of all, what is ayahuasca? Well, ayahuasca is a plant medicine. We would sometimes call it a psychedelic, but of course, as soon as you say psychedelic, someone says drug. And in South Central America, for a very long time, ayahuasca has been understood as a medicine, a plant medicine, along with the rest of the jungle's herbal apothecary. Ayahuasca is a kind of brew that's made between a leaf and a vine, and it's put together. And what does it do? Well, it's been used for a lot of different things and in different contexts. I'll talk about that a little bit too. But generally speaking, the ayahuasca medicine opens up visionary states of consciousness, alters your state of mind and your consciousness. Your whole mind-body reality is very deeply altered by the plant medicine. And it also has it has a way of putting people in touch with some of those things that you don't want to be looking at, or you don't want to be dealing with, or maybe you're afraid of, or that live within you that are often, vexing you in some way. And so by doing that, people will also, it's a purgative, so people will also purge during the experience. And most people report, along with the purgative experience, the facing of fear, and the altered state of consciousness, people describe it as an ecstatic healing experience. And that's largely how it's been used for a long time in South Central America. But it's not always been used by people in the way that it's being used now. For example, many people are now treating it essentially like a religious experience to be had again and again and again, like going to a yoga class, but maybe, once every couple of months or a couple times a year, or, something like that. So it has this feeling of being like a ritual or religious or spiritual ceremony that people, feel like they may need to go through somewhat regularly in order to like cleanse. And it's been made into a kind of spiritual path. Now, in the history of the South Central American Amazonian region, it has a lot of diverse uses, right? So I won't get into all of those. I'll just say it's not always been used exactly in the way that it is now, where you see this big culture kind of growing up around it as this like deep sort of ceremonial, somewhat semi-regular healing experience. A person may have seen a curandero or a plant doctor in the Amazon, and the doctor may have taken the shaman, we might say, may have taken ayahuasca specifically in order to with the patient perhaps in the room, and the patient would not necessarily have taken ayahuasca, but the shaman may have taken it in order to gain visionary insight into the body of the patient, as well as to be able to speak to the plant spirits in the Amazon in order to, say, match up a specific kind of treatment for a specific kind of illness. Being able to see the roots of its illness too, in a sort of karmic way. Oh, it came from a curse that your brother-in-law put on you, or whatever the case might be. So now this practice also eventually was also used in other settings where the person along with the shaman may take the sort of sacred drink. And in other places in South America, the tradition has become a part of religious life. For example, the Santo Daime from Brazil, the UDV, there's other groups that use plant medicine as a kind of sacrament. And in that sense, there's almost like a liturgical season surrounding the use of the plant medicine in ways that, like the Santo Daime, for example, you're going to be dancing and singing all together as a group while having the experience, and it's thought to be cleansing and healing and part of spiritual evolution. Now, that's a more recent, development, say the last century, and that development comes with a kind of syncretism between different, Afro-Brazilian shamanic traditions as well as Catholicism. So it's like a really trippy it's like a sort of trippy psychedelic ayahuasca, nature-based Catholicism. I was part of the Santo Daime for a while and really learned a lot, and just my experiences were just absolutely beautiful. So anyway, and then also there was lots of difficult experiences too. I'll be talking about that later, but at any rate, and then there's another model, there's other models of how ayahuasca may be used in a more, say, religious setting. It is cathartic, it is healing, both physically and mentally. But a person in the Amazon, again, they I heard this said to me once by a shaman in Peru, that, maybe once or twice in a person's lifetime would they need to go and drink ayahuasca if they were suffering from something that was, afflicting them really deeply, and it was thought to be a part of magic, or it was thought to have been a kind of psycho-spiritual crisis. So at any rate, now, of course, when we had people, like Terence McKenna and others who went down to the Amazon and started drinking ayahuasca and making, basically sharing the experiences with other people, saying, like, this is how it changes your mind. This is how it changes your state of consciousness. This is what it does. It has amazing, like, actually miraculous healing powers in some cases. And I've witnessed those firsthand. It's real. And I've experienced them for myself too. The kinds of things that can be healed and dealt with in a ceremony are pretty profound. Like, it's And we don't know a lot about it, right? I mean, we know not in the kind of Western empirical world. So it has a lot of mystery around it, and sometimes a lot of misunderstanding. And anyway, it became more popular for people in the West to start going down. I went down in 2004, and no, it's 2000. It was the May of 2005. That was my first experience, and then it was in my life all the way up until about 2015. So just a little before that, so about 10 years. And then also probably over the course of 10 years of working with ayahuasca, both in South America and in some cases in the United States, in certain like underground circles. Don't ask me about them, I'm not in touch with them any longer. um, the the experience for me, I've calculated like over, probably somewhere between 100 and 150 cups of ayahuasca. So it was, like, and that probably around, like 100 plus ceremonies, something like that. So, and that was over a course of like 10 years. So there were times where it was a lot, like a concentrated participation. And I would say that I considered it to be like a spiritual path, almost like a religion. Um, so that's a little bit about that, how long I used it, what it's used for, some of the diverse uses of it. It's considered by some to be a healing grandmotherly energy, some people will call it grandmother ayahuasca. But in the region that I first drank in the Amazon, although I drank with groups that referred to ayahuasca as madre, but in Peru, where I drank the particular kind of medicine that I drank, the ayahuasca that I drank, the sort of chief medicinal spirit was not considered a grandmother, but a grandfather, Papatua. So there's different there's different lineages of thought and tradition, and the ayahuasca seems to open up a dimension of the spirit world, for lack of a better word, higher realms of consciousness, in which there is not necessarily just one entity or being that you're communing with. Sometimes people think that they think that ayahuasca is just this one being. I don't think that's actually the case, because I mean, depending on what lineage you're working with, what they're brewing and what spirits they're involved with, ayahuasca seems to more generally open up the spirit realm. And then depending on who the shaman is sort of allied with in that realm, that's the kind of experience that you're going to have, the kind of guidance that's going to bring you through the experience. The ceremonies are conducted almost entirely by sound, which means sound and percussion or rhythm. So whether you're with the daime or you're in any kind of traditional ayahuasca setting, typically there's a leaf rattle, something called icaros, which are like musical melodies that shamans learn from the plants, often while dieting for long periods of time in isolation, and basically learning how to stay centered in the experience, and also to guide and sort of command the experience with the icaros, the musical melodies that they sing, as well as the rhythm that they keep with the leaf rattle, sometimes called a chacapa. And then in like the daime and other places, you'll have guitars, maracas singing, but it's almost as though in order to move through the experience in a way that is integrated, meaningful, safe, protected, and allows for the healing to happen, there are songs that guide and then call the medicine spirits as well, call in different medicinal healing spirits to work in the bodies of the participants. And the songs do that, as well as keep everyone moving along like you're paddling in a boat together. So there are all sorts of experiences that people can have while drinking ayahuasca. It's not at all uncommon to speak with deceased people or deceased loved ones. It's not at all uncommon to have, out-of-body experiences is like an understatement, but out-of-body experiences, to be able to understand the difference between the body and the soul, or the body and the spirit, to commune with different animal or spirit guides, to access very, very deep sort of ancestral or karmic understanding of one's patterns or behaviors, to face different kinds of unconscious traumas from the past, and to move through them in these kind of visionary encounters that heal as they purge. so much more. But to describe what an ayahuasca experience is like is very difficult, because it very much transcends the normal limits or constraints of everyday consciousness. Um, and it's not to say that one needs a psychedelic, what to speak of ayahuasca itself, one of the world's most potent psychedelics, in order to access or intuit or feel or sense into the reality of these domains, or to experience such healing. This is something I'll cover in part 3, um, but of course I don't see that there's many cultures all over the planet have also used entheogens, plant medicines, as a facilitation for, opening up certain realms that are often covered or closed. So that's a little bit, again, just a background. I was in graduate school doing 2 back-to-back degrees in creative writing, and a master's and then an MFA. And in my master's program, I started a fictional account of my first ceremonies in the Amazon. I had constructed a independent study in travel writing, and went down to Peru to write about ayahuasca for my master's program. I had a really cool grad advisor at Central Michigan University who allowed me to do that. It was really cool. And then I went to Georgia College and State for my MFA down south. And in that program, I continued in a nonfiction, more memoir style account of the ongoing experiences I was having, and how they were really also addressing this lineage of Christian karmic baggage in the family between myself, my dad, my grandfather. And Also, ayahuasca helped me, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but a critical part of that book was that I had developed an opiate addiction in my early 20s. And so not anything as serious as what some people deal with, but basically I had a surgery and got hooked on pain pills for a while. And then the ayahuasca experiences helped me to purge that, along with nicotine, certain degree of alcohol, consumption, a lot of other stuff. So it helped me to get sober. That's one of the most practical effects that, clinicians will talk about with ayahuasca today, even in, popular publications and peer-reviewed studies and stuff like that, is that it seems to treat addictions pretty well. It was certainly the case for me. So I wrote a book about all of this in my MFA program. And then I was following a number of different writers who were at that time writing about, you know, altered states of consciousness and psychedelics and so forth, psychedelic medicine, and I ended up writing for a website, was there from the day it launched, called Reality Sandwich. And I was one of the contributing editors and daily bloggers. We wrote a lot about ayahuasca, and eventually my book was published with the help of the editors of this web magazine called Reality Sandwich. So Tartar Penguin, which is a really kind of a cool new age division of imprint of Penguin, they picked up my book thanks to Reality Sandwich being like my agent, basically. And my book was a memoir called Fishers of Men, The Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest. And it was about intergenerational healing from Christian wounds. And my father ended up going to the Amazon he was a preacher, and he ended up going to the Amazon. He was having kind of a mental and spiritual health crisis, and during his ministry at the same time that I was dealing with addiction. And he ended up going down and receiving some amazing healing from the plant medicine as well. So it ended up being this kind of father-son story, which was then published in 2010. Prior to that, say between 2006 and 2010, I was starting to study astrology just casually, and really starting to fall in love with it. And then, in 2010, when my book came out and I was going on a national book tour, I had lost my job, was starting to collect unemployment. It was a really awful situation. It was my Saturn return. And I just decided I'm going to come out of the closet as an astrologer, and started doing readings for people, and sort of advertising that I was doing readings and giving out my card and stuff like that while I was on this book tour that Tartar Penguin sent me on, and Reality Sandwich was supporting me. And so anyway, at that time, I also started a meetup group in New York City and launched my astrology practice that actually, created Nightlight Astrology on the day that my book was published in July of 2010, so 10 years ago. And and so then my practice took off. And then so between, say, 2006 and 2013, 14, when my experience with ayahuasca was starting to wind down, during that whole time, as I was studying astrology, ayahuasca also became a medium through which a lot of astrological insights came. And these insights are not unique to me. If you're a practitioner or student of anything and you're drinking ayahuasca, one of the interesting benefits is that ayahuasca is ayahuasca has a way of granting insights into whatever it is that you are immersed in. So, like, let's say that you were really immersed in, I don't know, like you're a personal trainer or something like that. Ayahuasca would give you some pretty incredible insights about the body, about muscle groups, about the weights you're using, about, so it's not that like ayahuasca chose me. It's just, that it was literally just, I was studying astrology as much as I could and then going into ceremonies. And so there was a lot of insights coming up about what I was studying and learning about astrology. The things were just connecting. And ayahuasca just has a way of helping us understand more of what is already there that we don't necessarily see. So, okay, so that's my background. That's like the biographical background. So I want to talk now about what effects it had on me practically over the course of many years, and not all at once. It's a gradual process. Ayahuasca is not a heal-all. It doesn't fix everything. It's scary. It doesn't always work for everybody. Sometimes people with underlying mental health conditions or even who are on certain kinds of drugs can't do it or can have really bad reactions if they do. It's complicated by the culture that surrounds it, who you're doing it with. Set and setting mean a great deal. I always did it in a sacred setting with a shaman who was, had been through led people through thousands of ceremonies. So, those kinds of factors were really important for me. These were sanctioned religious ceremonies and rituals, not at all, casual experiences. And I believe that there are also people out there who go to lodges right now. Unfortunately, as the tourism around this has increased, in some ways it's watered the tradition down. There's people who are out there to make more money now. You really need, a good recommendation. People will always ask me this, so I'll just put it out there right now. I went to the Blue Morpho Lodge in Iquitos, Peru. Really enjoyed my time there with Don Alberto, his teacher Don Julio, who had passed the wisdom down to him, and then Hamilton Souther and some other Westerners who were there studying, and a number of apprentices who have gone through that place now. And was it perfect? No. I could easily, make criticisms about things that I didn't like or that weren't perfect, but I was safe and overwhelmingly positive experience. I say that just because I can't guarantee that everyone who goes would have a good experience, but I had a good one and felt very safe. And notice that there was respectful space held for others too. Now you say that, and I promise you probably won't, unless you get a personal recommendation from someone to go to any kind of lodge. If you look at reviews online, you could find a lodge that has 4.5 out of 5 stars, or there will still be a few experiences that people have that they may have had trouble integrating, or they're so in other words, you're not going to have, I don't think any ayahuasca lodge is going to have 100% satisfied customers, because ayahuasca is not a satisfying experience in a lot of ways. It is, but it really isn't. So, so just know that as well, if you're like looking around and deciding to go, and make sure that, it's, I would just say this generally, it's worth it to really vet wherever you're going to go, like very carefully, because there's more kind of, unfortunately, there's just more junk out there now. So the positive practical effects it had on me, given all of this, I'm going to talk about some of the negative effects that it had on me as well in the third video of this series. So remember, that's coming later. Sobriety, number one thing. And I don't just mean sobriety as in I stopped drinking. I mean sobriety as in the value of living with a clean, clear mind and body. Like the leaving these ayahuasca ceremonies, it touched not just on, alcohol or smoking or, like stuff like that I was struggling with, that I was doing in excess, or even opiates, which I actually had an addiction to. But it purged those things within, I'd say, my first year and a half of drinking ayahuasca. I was sober and have been, mostly sober since. There's been some, like around my wedding, you know what I mean? Like certain times where I let loose a little bit more, but my path now with yoga is clearly committed to sobriety now as a part of the discipline. But anyway, at any rate, sobriety, the ayahuasca medicine really purged me of the habit of trying to gratify myself by altering my senses, specifically with substances that are not my friends. So, for example, excessive caffeine or sugar in the beginning, way down on both things, and eventually eliminated both. Well, not sugar, but eliminated caffeine from my diet, and now eat very little sugar. So also, and I'm not saying anything. I'm not trying to be prescriptive. I'm just telling you what it did for me. Alcohol gone, lots of stuff. So sobriety. And also the value of just living with a clean, clear mind. It's like taking care of the temple. You know what I mean? The temple of the body that houses the soul. It also imparted to me the absolute central role that spiritual practice must play in my everyday life. That's probably, along with sobriety, the two best things that it gave me, was this realization that these insights are great. This feeling of being healed is great, but it has to be maintained, because you're a living being, not a static creature that achieves something and then that something doesn't ever change again. You have to keep living. So you have to learn how to maintain the health that you've gained through these healing experiences. And that requires daily practice. Daily. I always say this to people, sometimes it's like, I know it's hard. It's hard to make it daily, but you'll feel better and everything starts going better. Your spiritual path, you start growing if you have a daily spiritual practice. So daily spiritual practice, sobriety. The third one is greater virtues. I'm not perfect. I still have lots of faults and flaws, I probably always will, but it helped me to be a better person. By that, I mean acting in a more ethical way, a more conscientious way, making more careful, considerate, thoughtful decisions, being more concerned about service and love than myself. I'm still very selfish, as I think we all are, but it helped me to understand service and selflessness and humility more deeply than I had before. And it also imparted to me the final thing that was a better work ethic. The better work ethic, it helped me understand that nothing comes without sacrifice and hard work. And you have to really put your heart into things, not just, breaking your back, but hard work of the heart, right? Hard work of the heart. So sobriety, spiritual practice, better virtuous behavior, and a better work ethic overall. That's how I would break it down. And those things I can't even begin to quantify, because who I was before and who I was after these experiences and what they imparted in me is the story of my life. That's so it's like I can't overstate how big of an impact positively these things had on me. Now, what spiritual realizations did it provide me with? So the first and most important one, which I grew up with an understanding of in the Christian church as a preacher's kid, but I never saw it, felt it, understood it visibly. It was only I can't say it was only intellectual, but it was so much more intellectual than it was embodied, which is that I am not my body. Ayahuasca showed me very clearly, you're a spirit soul inhabiting a body. You're not the body itself. Having an experience of that was as tangible to me as, going for a swim or seeing the sunshine, that it was that if someone says you didn't see the sunshine, it was just in your head, right? You would be like, you're trying to convince me of something that I can't be unconvinced about. Sorry, pal. Right? So, for me, the experience of seeing that I am not the body was as tangible and factual because of these experiences as, sunshine or water. You can feel them, you can see them, you can touch them, right? You can taste them. So it was that real to me. The second thing that I learned, similar, I am alive. My soul, I have a soul and it's alive. It has always been alive. It will always be alive. It can't die. It wasn't born. It can't be harmed in any way. I am a soul. So again, these things for me were because of the nature of the experiences, and it's very hard to discuss how the experiences show you this, and I'll do my best in a minute, but the two things that came side by side was you're not your body, and you are a living being who has no beginning and has no end and can't be harmed. And so what came from that, those two things, was this understanding, this deep, deep sense that I'm okay. Life is okay. Life is to be trusted. There are a lot of there's a huge variety of experiences that a person can have. Many are quite terrifying, but we suffer maybe the most from not knowing that we are eternal beings already, and that this temporary human experience is not our first or our last experience, and that there is no end to our experience in this regard. So those insights were so, I can't describe what they did to me. They imparted to me a faith and a trust, and a love in my heart that, you know, I can't. What can you say? What else can I say? I mean, those things have made me who I am. They have changed my life, and I can't ever unsee or unfeel or unknow those things now. So that's, I mean, maybe God could take away my memory and I could be completely ignorant again tomorrow. It's possible, but it feels to me like I'll never be able to not unsee those things, right? Unfeel and unknow those things. So the third realization was that to reach some final goal or achievement. No, okay, actually, let me go back a second. I'm not my body. Where does that come from? Because you leave your body. you literally just fly through different dimensions of consciousness outside of your body. And when you come back to your body, you realize that it's something you inhabit, that you feel and sense the presence of a spirit soul in your body. That happens. So that one's kind of easy to describe. I'm always alive, have always been, and always will be. I'm a soul. Can't be harmed, can't be destroyed, will always be, have always been. Because in these experiences, many people, not just myself, but the experience that I had was one of literally seeing, in many cases, the transmigration of my soul through all different kinds of animal species of life, and as well as into different human forms and other forms that, frankly, are not. They're not. They're not of this world. Like, just like other, maybe they're from other planets. I don't know, but these experiences that you have of seeing yourself moving through innumerable forms of life, which many people have, and evolving and growing and changing, and then there's this deep knowingness that comes through that there's no beginning or end to this experience, to this experience of being alive. And the goal is therefore not to terminate the experience, right? Not to, some people think, oh man, it's so exhausting being alive. I just want to go to sleep, or I want to come to rest in something or in someone or somewhere, because this movement is killing me. Well, it's not the movement that's killing us. It's the movement through the dualities of life in this particular realm. And so the movement itself keeps going. The movement itself is eternal. It's just that what we're looking for is a place in which to continue being a being and being alive in ways that are more compatible with our eternal nature. The hard part about the material realm and the way that it's limiting and confining and even prison-like in some ways is that it's always in flux, and the material forms of this world are always dying. And so one of the things that the ayahuasca also showed me was that there are innumerable realms, and not all of them are material. Material is another energy that's of God. So it's not to say, but it's just that it's not the only thing. So if we live in the material world with a sense that the material is all that there is, we are living in a kind of willful illusion or ignorance, not because the material world is unreal or unimportant or unsacred, but because it's just one little part of everything that is. And it turns out that to be here and to think that this is all there is suffering, is a kind of ignorance, is a kind of illusion. And so the ayahuasca experience showed that to me, but also said enlightenment is not about getting out of here, or it's not about somehow eliminating your individual state of consciousness. Enlightenment is about the continual process of being alive, and being alive with greater and ever expanding awareness of who we are and all that is real and all that is constantly expanding. So like kind of this view of God and of self that is not ever supposed to get somewhere, but is rather on a journey of love, of continued heart and mind opening, heart and mind expansion, you could say. But everything is included along the way. Nothing is left behind or condemned in the process. Just like when you're in love with someone, you reach a new level of intimacy, and it's like cresting like a wave. And in that space, you realize that the intimacy was forged through every single difficult thing you ever experienced. So this process of enlightenment is a process of continued deepening and expanding experience, inclusive of everything that's come behind, inclusive of other realms or states of consciousness. And evolution through these different forms of life, it'll just cycle through all sorts of cyclical dualities if we are not consciously participating in the unfolding of life. So, for example, ayahuasca says, look, you put very, very clear, it'll show you, it'll actually make you feel the way in which you're locked into and struggling and suffering with certain kinds of cycles. And it'll just give you a really clear picture that, like, if you just keep fighting within the cycle and banging your head on the same wall, it's like, I think it was Einstein who said definition of insanity is trying to do something over and over again and expecting a different result. It's the gist of it. And that's what ayahuasca would literally show me in these visions, was myself caught up in all sorts of patterns, trying to find happiness in a place that, in things, and things eventually die and fall apart. And it just, in this way, it said, look, spiritual enlightenment is a process that never ends. It has no beginning either. And until you take up that process, until you participate in that awakening, this is the kind of thing that you're locked in at the moment. It's, it's very confining experience when there's so much more. So, but it's, there's this feeling with ayahuasca where, it's purging you. I mean, it's kind of clearing and cleansing all sorts of baggage. But there's also this realization that, the point of cleansing and clearing all of this is not to, eventually just kind of like annihilate and eliminate your individual consciousness, because the journey of being alive, again, has no beginning and no end. That was a really deep teaching that it left me with. And so in that sense, sometimes people, they imagine enlightenment as this goal where when I reach it, then, I will no longer have to suffer with being alive, with being a being. And the view that I got was actually one of, the soul discovering more of itself, its experience of living in different realms, innumerable, endless realms, just becomes more heavenly. And that capacity for that to expand is unlimited. But the point is not to eliminate the burden of being a conscious being, which sometimes I think people think that must be the point of spiritual life. Anyway, that there are innumerable realms of reality, and the material realm is only one of them. And again, this is because you're able to see. It's a bit like looking. There's this picture that we use in one of my classrooms, and I've talked about it in the past. I think it was a Romanesco. Romanesco. I don't think they look like broccoli or cauliflower. The Romanesco has these fractal patterns in it, right? And you're looking at it and you're like, it's a broccoli, but it's more than a broccoli. So similarly, that there are innumerable realms of reality, that they're here. They're not like somewhere else. Maybe they are as well, but there's also there's innumerable realms that are right here in consciousness all around us. And these experiences open you up to that by literally just showing you them. I mean, it's that literal. So these innumerable realms of reality and of consciousness, it's not like someone tripping out being like, whoa, reality, it's not like that at all. I mean, oftentimes you're it's more like being projected into some kind of weird sci-fi New York City that's like filled with information and entities and spirits and beings, and you're like, whoa. And you realize that they're there all the time, that there are subtle realms, there are invisible realms that our apparatus, our senses can't see. So it's like literally you're kind of open to that. um I realized very quickly that a huge amount of the population is unfortunately um, chained into a very narrow understanding of who they are and of what is real, namely, my bank account, my looks, my fame, my success, my marriage, my social rank, any identity factors that we tend to get caught up in, for good or bad. That these are the kinds of things that people are, by and large, imprisoned by, and that I was too, and that there is more. So that this is a very real experience that I think, again, I think a lot of these experiences that I'm mentioning, some of them are maybe more specific to me, but many of these experiences are very universal. Many people have them when they drink ayahuasca. Now, the material world is governed by spiritual laws, not just physical laws, or the physical laws have a spiritual basis. This is also hugely important, that, sometimes people are like, oh, there's the laws of physics. So there's also spiritual laws of karma. This became very, very real to me because I started being able to see patterns of behavior and consequences and certain sequences of events in my life that were destined because of certain choices and certain states of mind and consciousness. And so there are material laws like gravity, but there's also spiritual laws of karma. And these experiences show you them in a way that, again, it'll just leave you never really being able to question. Now, also, there's no karmic solution to a spiritual problem. So this was a big one because it said, look, no matter how I had some habits in my life, obsessive habits of trying to control my environment, like in order to try to make things as like, I don't know if you've ever gone through this before, but you're like, it's like your house gets trashed, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm going to start living clean. I'm going to start picking up. I'm never going to let it get like this again. It's a Saturday morning. You start, you start blasting the Indigo Girls in the house. You've got your headband on, whatever you're like, okay, that's it. And then you clean the whole house and you're sitting there and it's like, it's so nice. Flash forward a month later, and you're looking around with the same look on your face, right? So the point is that oftentimes it's going to take a person changing on a very deep level to become tidier. It's not going to happen just because they decide to do, to bench lift their whole house back into shape, once every 6 months, and tell themselves a nice story about how they're going to turn it all around now. A lot of us deal with our problems like that, and ayahuasca basically showed me that until change of consciousness occurs, trying to rearrange the externals rarely gets at the root. So the consciousness change for me, was in the recognition that I'm a spirit soul. I'm not my body. There are innumerable realms. I'm not seeing everything that there is. I need a daily spiritual practice. I need to take care of the temple of my body. Just all of these things that I had learned, put into practice. I realized that until those things became number one, that the attempts that I made to change everything would be like that once a month, bench lift your house back to tidiness routine, and that they tend to fall apart. And I believe the same thing is true ultimately for the world and for the universe. Oftentimes we're actually on a sinking ship and we're just bailing water and we don't know it. Because the ayahuasca also showed me the impermanence of the material energy, that in this universe, our solar system will die someday. You've heard me say that a bunch before, but it's true. So, our universe will die someday. So the constant recycling of material energy says, look, even if you make the perfect society, it will fall apart someday, right? Even if you make that's not to say you don't make it. It's to say, make sure that you're tending to a change in spiritual consciousness that's at the root of any kind of maneuvering you're trying to do in the material energy, because otherwise it won't last. And the real point of having a clean house is not just tidiness. It's also to facilitate, your spiritual practice. If it's tidier, your mind's tidier, it's easier to practice. So these kinds of things became really important to me, that I can't just keep trying to manipulate the externals to find happiness. It's got to come from within. There are no karmic solutions to a spiritual problem. Past lives are too many to count and mostly a distraction from who we are right now. I saw that I had evolved through literally, I mean, if I just had to like put a number on it, like millions, maybe more, maybe billions, I don't know. But that there was innumerable transmigrations of the soul, and that trying to trace their history, or thinking that if I can just get back into the karmic history, then I'll be able to change the problem now, that was a faulty way of looking at things. So for example, there's no, like I said, there's no way that you can, use karmic solutions for a spiritual problem. So similarly, by going back in time, although I'm not against past life regressions at all, but the way that they're used is really important, because if past life regressions help you understand the things you're dealing with right now and help you move toward a spiritual solution right now, then great. But it was also this realization that there was this kind of obsession with trying to go back into the past and figure out, where did it go wrong? Like at what point did I not tie my shoe correctly or something? And then that's why I'm in the place that I'm in now. And that's actually not at all the model. And that in this sense, past lives, although potentially interesting and potentially helpful for a lot of people, are completely missing the point, which is that even if you understand what went wrong in a past lifetime, that information or knowledge applied now will only be more of trying to use a karmic solution for a spiritual problem. So the spiritual problem means your consciousness has to change, and be more of you has to be uncovered. More of reality has to be unveiled. That process takes committed spiritual practice first. At which point, if some understanding of a pattern or a behavior from a previous life informs this one, great. But if it builds up your ego, run. You know what I mean? If you get all stuck in the stories, I was an Atlantean priestess, or whatever the case might be. Past lives are too many to count and mostly a distraction from who we are right now. The body, mind, and my own psychology are not who I am. They need tending to, and it's helpful to understand, but I am not my mind, I'm not my body, and I'm not even my own behavior and psychology, which I knew because in these ceremonies, I would be pulled into a space of total observation, and then would see almost almost like splitting part of me outside of my body, and then watching the other part of me go through these gesticulations of behavior on mental levels, and just realizing that it's like programming, it's like code, and that's not who I am, that I could fully feel my beingness, my wholeness, and was in observing or relating to these behaviors, but that the behaviors and the modification of the behaviors even, again, is not the same as the change, the fundamental shift into understanding myself as a spirit soul. And that cultivation has to be constant. So even my own psychology is not who I am, although understanding that psychology is really important and can be, is hugely helpful. We are what we associate with. This was huge for me in realizing that what I watch, what I take into my ears, what I take into my body, the people I associate with, anything that I keep around me influences me. In the same way that in ayahuasca ceremonies, it's kind of like this, when you're in a dream and you're like, oh, I'm floating down a river and everything is, really wet. And all of a sudden you realize that your hand is in your water spilled and your hand is in the pool. So this happened to me actually in an ayahuasca ceremony, and had just an amazingly profound effect on me, and helping me to understand how susceptible I am to environmental influence, persuasion, suggestion. And we think, oh, I'm sitting in and I'm considering something. I'm just watching the news. I'm just listening and considering. But actually, when we absorb ourselves in anything, we become like a sponge. And so, in the way that that we sponge up stuff around us is pretty profound. So, and we have to be very careful of that. That was a lesson that I got from the medicine that was really amazing. There's no purge that's final that can help you get to the bottom of things, because it turns out you're a bottomless being. Your experiences are endless. And so trying to overly focus on healing the past is also kind of a fool's errand at a certain point. Because the past is never ending. Sometimes people will take up this kind of, in my opinion, slightly delusional position that I'm here to heal all of my ancestors, right? Like, I'm here to heal the ancestral line. And then they're like, yeah, last week I like passed level 2, I cleared my uncle, or, something like that. And these ceremonies, what I got the message of is, I wrote a book about ancestral healing. So it's not like I don't believe in it, but it's that there's, in a sense, you can't, the soul is not broken and doesn't need fixing, right? It needs awakening. And to a certain extent, the process of doing healing work participates in that awakening. But at a certain point, if we start mistakenly thinking that it's the healing and the clearing and the fixing and the mending and and I achieve that, right? And I get that done. It's cleared. It's done. That thinking becomes obsessive, and it keeps us locked into an understanding of ourselves, of our history, of our past that's also not nearly sophisticated enough, because the past is many things. It's not just bad or broken, and events are never that simple either. So because they exist on many multiple levels, part of what really is healing about ayahuasca when it comes to the past is that it helps you to understand more of what was there in a traumatic event. And by understanding more of what was there, the trauma is relieved of its kind of singular and almost like monotheistic, obsessive quality. So that a trauma has a way of echoing over itself because it needs to be diversified. The trauma needs to be opened up and understood on multiple planes of reality simultaneously, so that the pressure of that trauma is not, just perpetuating and hammering us and then feeling like it has to be cleared. Well, you can't clear something. It's like you can't clear something if it has 40 more layers to it than you even understand already. You know what I mean? So that's the idea with trauma as well in ayahuasca ceremonies. Eventually you keep drinking, you get to a point where you realize, in the beginning, a lot of people are like, I have to keep going back and drinking more because I've got to cleanse and heal and purge, and I'm not done yet. There's so much more left. It's like, yeah, that's endless. You know what I mean? And that attitude, that mindset itself gets loosened up if you keep drinking ayahuasca long enough. So that, yes, you may do ancestral healing. There's always that. That's always a part of what's happening. But also there's a sense in which you can't ever get to the bottom of it, and then you let go of the attempt to do so. To get to think about it, like if you're in a relationship, right, with someone and you say, I just want to get to the bottom of it and just finish it, right? The person would be like, you're talking to a person here, like not a project. And that's a similar way we have to look at our souls and of life itself. Anyway, so finally, last one I'll share is that my spiritual truth is illuminated in the heart. It's not something that we gain through trying to understand things or grasp things mentally. We come into true knowledge and true wisdom about anything and everything because of being absorbed in it with our heart, with our attention and our heart and our mind, our soul and everything. When we become absorbed in things, in other words, relationship is the language of reality. And it's absorption in relationship that starts delivering information, or in the case of spiritual life, insight and illumination. So in ayahuasca ceremonies over time, I also learned how to sit up and breathe and sing along and stay very, very present and steady, being fully absorbed and fully present in everything that was occurring, which is a lot mentally and emotionally and physically in an ayahuasca ceremony. And as I did that, natural things that I needed to know, rather than trying to go in and have to solve them or fix them or whatever, would just start being illuminated. Here's the truth. Here's the truth. Here's an insight, right? Just simple, sometimes very simple instructions. Oh, you've been struggling with this? Yeah, drink more water or whatever, very simple things, a lot of them for me about drinking water. Anyway, so that wisdom comes in through the heart by being absorbed in spiritual life. And also the number one thing that it gave me philosophically, save the best for last, was the realization that I have a divine source, that there is a divine being called God, that God is a person. In other words, God is personal and God is an actual being, that God is my source, that I am a part of God and God is a part of me. And but that I share in a relationship with that source, and that contemplation, devotion, absorption in love of God became, through those ceremonies, the center of my life. Not perfectly, but that is the most important thing for me in my life. And although that has something in common with my Christian past, this was also an experience that delivered it into a much broader universal category. In some ways, universalized the faith that I had grown up with. So all of those things came from these experiences in ayahuasca ceremonies. So I hope that this has been interesting to you. Like I said, there's 3 parts that I'm going to do. Part 2 is going to be walking through how did ayahuasca point me towards astrology, and then how did it start teaching me astrology or giving me helpful insights about astrology and some examples of that. And then in part 3, I'm going to be talking about the virtues or benefits of psychedelics for spiritual life and astrology, as well as the potential pitfalls. So I hope this has been interesting. I'd love to hear your comments. If you have had ayahuasca experiences or any kinds of psychedelic experiences, or if you naturally have a way of accessing different states of consciousness, I would love to hear from you throughout this series and hear your own reflections and insights as well. All right, that's it for now. We'll see you again for part 2 soon. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.